Um, this I should do the James Bondage channel, but since I can't upload to it, I'm just going to go on. This is what I'm going to do is start to talk out my position and try to pretty much tell the story of the controversy between the church fathers and the controversy over faith and works and grace in history, and how this has played out and has been a major point of debate throughout the history of Christianity and even before. So as we start to frame this whole story, it's really difficult where to pinpoint, where to start. I guess probably the best place is Galatians chapter 2, and how the church fathers had argued over the controversy that had happened in Galatians chapter 2. Now, when we look at the letters that went back and forth between Saint Jerome, the writer of the Latin Vulgate, and Saint Augustine of Hippo, we're talking church fathers, there was a string of letters that went back and forth between the two over the incident that happened in the book of Galatians chapter 2 when Paul had rebuked Peter because men from James had persuaded Peter to step away from the kosher table. This is the focal point of the major debate over faith and works over centuries. So the discourse between St. Augustine of Hippo and St. Jerome was over St. Jerome's take on an apostle rebuking an apostle. Here we have something that was very difficult to get around, something that the church fathers needed to wrestle with. Because of papal infallibility, it would be impossible for an apostle to make a mistake, to err, and to not be straightforward with the gospel. And so this very issue tore at the very fabric of faith and inerrancy. And so St. Jerome had to figure out, well, how could this be that an apostle, the apostle Peter, could actually be in error? And in error because of a church father, another supposed equal he was afraid of men from James the Just. And how is Paul, equally supposedly an apostle, rebuking Peter? So St. Jerome thought, well, this must not have been because any of the apostles could possibly be in error. It must have been staged. Yes, that's what it was. It was that they needed to show the Judaizing believers, the men from James, that faith and works went together in such a way that you didn't have to impose upon the Gentiles a law. So this was, in St. Jerome's idea, the writer of the Latin Vulgate, a way to reconcile the idea that supposedly an apostle was called out and said that he was not being straightforward with the gospel, that an apostle made a mistake. But Paul had said that I'm telling you the truth and I'm not lying. And St. Augustine said, well, this would really, really damage the whole idea, the whole image of us trusting in the Bible if they were playing tricks and actually deceiving people. So St. Augustine's point of view was that this cannot possibly be true. Now, this was conjecture on St. Jerome's point, and St. Augustine said this is a dangerous conjecture here. Now, you can look into the letters between St. Augustine and St. Jerome's. You can look them up. I could cite you. There's numbers on them or whatnot. But this was the discourse that was going on between the church fathers when it came to this controversy between Paul and Peter in Antioch. So as we go on further to dig into, well, what were the antagonists? What set up this meeting, this dispute? And in order to really look at the roots of this dispute, you really have to look at Christianity itself. The early church had not reached out to the Gentiles. The early church was Jewish. It was a Jewish faith. Supposedly their Jewish Messiah came, and the rest of the world was not Jewish. And to the Jews, there was no reason to talk about a Jewish Messiah to the rest of the world. And we can see this because Peter was actually sent to the Gentiles, and when he was surprised at how God dealt with him on the issue. Now this is found in Acts chapter 10, and if you read the account of Cornelius, the Italian cohort, who had been especially picked out to have the gospel preached to him by Peter, there was when the contention started. For Jews, according to their law, were not supposed to talk or hang around or be seen with Gentiles, with people who were not kosher, and they were especially not supposed to eat with them. And being in the Jewish community around the early Christian church, Christians, even Christian believers, must have believed the same thing, because this was horrifying to Peter. As God had showed Peter as he was standing on a rooftop, and he was hungry, unkosher food, which was lowered from the heavens in a sheet. And there in the sheet, as it was spread out, were all these four-footed beasts and animals that were unkosher. And God had said to Peter, "Peter, rise, kill, and eat." And Peter, even though he was a Christian, still believed in the Jewish law and had been Jewish his entire life. And he said, "No, I have never eaten anything unclean in my entire life." To which God said, "Do not call unclean what I have called clean, or unkosher what I have called kosher." So now Peter is told by God himself that he does not need to be kosher. Now, many people say, well, that just meant that he could actually go in and talk to Gentiles. That did not mean that he actually ate with them. Many people tried to get around this idea that Peter never was actually unkosher, that he actually followed the kosher laws, which was untrue, because we can see that in Galatians chapter 2 that Peter was eating with the Gentiles and removed himself from the kosher table, from the unkosher table, to eat with the Jews at the kosher table, showing very clearly that Peter did in fact indulge. And if we take a look at Acts chapter 10, here is where the whole situation in Galatians chapter 2 was set up. Because Peter had to go back to the elders of the church, and he had to explain to them why he was unkosher and why he actually talked with Gentiles. You see, if Jews had believed that the gospel was going out to the rest of the world, then they wouldn't have held to the view that they were not supposed to speak to Gentiles. And they would not have held to the view that they were not to eat unkosher food. So in order to become a Christian, a Gentile had to convert to Judaism beforehand. So we know that this was the position of the church at the time. And so when Peter, in Acts chapter 7, went back to the elders of the church, he had to make up in his mind and explain to them how he actually was called by God to go in and eat unkosher food and fellowship with Gentiles. And so the first thing we see is that the elders of the church had asked Peter, Peter, you have, and basically with rebuking Peter, you went in with Gentiles and you ate with them. The elders of the church were accusing Peter of breaking the law, the Jewish law, of Jewish kosher law, and the law that he was not supposed to talk to Gentiles. And he was rebuked for it. But the question is did James the Just also rebuke him? And here's where it's logical, I believe, to assume that it was James the Just that had rebuked Peter, because when Peter was rebuked by Paul, it says that before certain men came from James, Peter was eating at the kosher table, the unkosher table. And when these men came from James, he withdrew himself. So it's logical to conclude that these elders of the church, James the Just being the head elder of the church at the time, had personally rebuked Peter over eating unkosher and also talking with Gentiles. Now, he may have accepted the idea that he could go in with the Gentiles, but eating unkosher, that was a no-no. So here we have an account where Peter was afraid of men from James. So these men of the circumcision, these men who said in Acts chapter 15 that unless a man is circumcised and follows the law of Moses, he can't be saved. These same men, when James or the elders of the church had spoken to Paul, and I believe James with them, you see all of these Jewish believers, and they're all zealous for the law, and they've heard of you, Paul, who are teaching Jews, not teaching just Gentiles, but teaching Jews not to follow the laws of Moses or be circumcised. They had a contention with Paul. Even though Paul was supposedly sent to the Gentiles, he, against their exhortation, Paul actually went and tried to proselytize Jews against the law of Moses. Now I can go on and explain it a little bit better and write it all down, but this is the beginning of what I would say the formation of the beginning chapters of a book. What needs to be explained are some of the things, some of the reasons why James had made Paul do a certain ritual to prove that he was following Jewish law, or why Paul had Timothy circumcised. And I'll go into more detail on the book and probably put it together more cohesively in subsequent broadcasts. Thank you very much.